Euaoi.
For those of you living under a rock and don't know who Seth MacFarlane is, he's the creator of the hit adult animated series Family Guy, a show so popular that it single-handedly tanked the adult animation genre with a bunch of bland, unappealing wannabe shows. Not only did Seth MacFarlane create Family Guy, but he also voices a lot of the characters on the show. He provides the voice for the main character, Peter Griffin, his baby son, Stewie, his perverted friend, Quagmire, his greedy father-in-law who has a good taste in music, Carter Pewterschmidt, the local news anchor, Tom Tucker, Dr. Hartman, whose name is based on Fairly Oddparents and Danny Phantom creator Butch Hartman, some pirate guy with wooden rods for limbs named Seamus, and even the family dog, Brian Griffin. What makes Brian Griffin's voice stand out from the rest of MacFarlane's other voice roles is that out of all of the characters in the show that are voiced by Seth, Brian's voice is basically MacFarlane's normal voice.
Who've been running it ever since. Yeah, these days I do voiceover on Family Guy, but...
Okay, 5 minutes, Miss Gina Big, and I will be right back with your Evian.
Backed up by a 2004 interview where Seth MacFarlane noted his similarities to Brian. He also revealed that Brian is his favorite character because he feels the most comfortable when playing that role. While this may seem funny at first given that Brian is a dog and Seth is a human being, but after looking into it deeper, it would make you wonder why Seth chose to represent himself as a dog in this wacky animated universe that he created. Unless Seth MacFarlane is a furry? While at first this may seem like such a bold assumption, but if you slowly start to put the pieces together, it starts to make much more sense. First, we're going to look into the similarities between Seth MacFarlane and Brian Griffin, and possible theories as to why he chose to represent himself as a dog, as well as any possible hints that Seth MacFarlane might be a furry. With all of that out of the way, let's hop right into the Peter Copter. As mentioned earlier, Brian Griffin and Seth MacFarlane share a lot of similarities. One of those being that Brian's voice is just MacFarlane's normal talking voice, but the same voice is just the tip of the iceberg. I know that this is not related to the video, but actor William H. Macy, best known for his role as Frank Gallagher on Shameless and Jerry Lundengard on Fargo, originally auditioned for the role of Brian, which Seth thought was a mistake in the long term. I know that's not related to the topic, but I thought you would find that to be interesting. It's no secret that Brian is a political liberal and an atheist who supports legalizing marijuana, gay marriage, and ending the war on terror. Although he tends to contradict his own views. In the episode April in Quahog, he starts praying out of panic when news anchors Tom Tucker and Diane Simmons announce that the world will end, later revealed to be an April Fool's joke. In Brian and Stewie, Brian revealed that he voted for John McCain. In the episode Excellence in Broadcasting, after hearing that conservative radio talk show host Rush Limbaugh is holding a book signing in Quahog, Brian decides to confront Limbaugh about his political beliefs. At the signing, Brian is dumbfounded after Limbaugh asks whether or not he has read anything he had ever written, causing Brian to leave in frustration. That night, as Brian is walking home, he is suddenly attacked by a street gang and is immediately saved by Rush Limbaugh, who single-handedly defeats the gang members. Thankful, Brian agrees to read Limbaugh's book and soon begins to believe that conservative republicanism was right all along. Seth MacFarlane is also a liberal atheist. MacFarlane explains his reasons for being an atheist by saying, "I do not believe in God. I'm an atheist. I consider myself a critical thinker, and it fascinates me that in the 21st century, most people still believe in, as George Carlin puts it, the invisible man living in the sky. MacFarlane is also a supporter of the Democratic Party. He has donated over $200,000 to various Democratic congressional candidates and to the 2008 presidential campaign of then US Senator Barack Obama. He has stated that he supports the legalization of cannabis. MacFarlane is a supporter of LGBT rights. He went on to say, "I'm incredibly passionate about my support for the gay community and what they're dealing with at this current point in time." Anyone who watches Family Guy should know that Brian is an avid drinker and user of various narcotics. To quote from his Wikipedia article, Brian is an alcoholic and is very fond of dry martinis, and is seen to have withdrawal symptoms in various episodes when he is told or forced to stop drinking. He smokes occasionally, although in the episode Mr. Griffin Goes to Washington, after seeing Peter promoting a corrupt cigarette company, he quit smoking, a habit he resumed at the end of the episode. He also regularly smokes marijuana. After a brief stint as a drug-sniffing dog, he developed a cocaine addiction, but after spending time in rehab, he managed to achieve sobriety. In the episode Seahorse Seashell Party, when the Griffins are forced inside during a hurricane, Brian takes some mushrooms to help pass the time, which causes him to go on a hallucinogenic trip and leads him to do harmful things like cutting off his ear. Seth MacFarlane is also quite the drinker as well. In fact, MacFarlane was scheduled to return to Los Angeles on American Airlines Flight 11, one of the planes hijacked in the September 11th terrorist attacks. Due to a hangover after the previous night's celebrations and an incorrect departure time from his travel agent, he arrived at Logan International Airport about 10 minutes too late to board the flight, as the gates had been closed. In the show, Brian sees himself as a romantic and has had several relationships over the years, mainly with human women. Brian will often abandon his own personal beliefs and personality in order to make himself more appealing to the woman he's attracted to, and sometimes resorts to lying in order to make himself look good. These relationships often end badly due to his inflated ego or being caught in a deception. In a 2004 interview, MacFarlane himself said, "I have some Brian-type issues from time to time, looking for the right person, but I date as much as the next guy." To provide more insight into how many women MacFarlane has dated, he dated Nicole Sullivan from 1998 to 2000, then Krista Campbell and Jessica Barth in 2006, Camille Guadi and Kat Foster the next year, Amanda Bynes and Eliza Dushku in 2008. In 2009, he dated Katie Saw and Kaylee Defer. Trisha Cummings from 2010 to 2012, and Game of Thrones Emilia Clarke from 2012 to 2013. He was also connected to Halston Sage in 2017. Even though it was never explained why Seth MacFarlane's self-insert character is a dog, one theory that's plausible is that he's based on Steve from Seth MacFarlane's short from What a Cartoon on Cartoon Network, Larry and Steve. In that short, a slow-minded man named Larry adopts an intelligent pet dog named Steve. While shopping for new furniture for Steve, Steve becomes the butt end of Larry's antics, as Larry has been shown to indirectly harm Steve throughout the short. The short itself is available to watch on YouTube if you're interested. After describing the short and hearing the voices of both Larry and Steve, it seems clear that these characters eventually evolved into Peter and Brian.
Therapeutic or what? How do you feel, Steve?
Like Agamemnon after the fury of Clytemnestra?
Oh, yeah. Who?
It's a tragedy.
Oh. Is everybody all right?
With that, you could argue that Steve was never intended to be a self-insert of Seth, but rather the slapstick victim of Larry's stupidity. But I forgot to mention one thing. There was another short with those characters that was made 2 years before Larry and Steve. It was called The Life of Larry and was created as MacFarlane's thesis film during 1994 to 1995 while he was studying at the Rhode Island School of Design. The short features a middle-aged everyman named Larry Cummings, his cynical talking dog Steve, his patient wife Lois, and his overweight teenage son, Milt. So, much like Peter, Larry was married to a woman named Lois, and Larry's son Milt became Chris from Family Guy. Another thing to note is that this short had cutaway gags like in Family Guy, and many of those jokes and cutaway gags used in The Life of Larry were later used in the first season of Family Guy, such as the Star Trek parody which was present in the Family Guy pilot. And much like Larry and Steve, this short can also be seen on YouTube if you're interested. One thing to note is that even before Family Guy, the character whose voice is Seth's normal voice is the dog.
Yeah, because they're obviously, Shatner is obviously, getting fed fairly well. Somebody's seeing to.
Even though Steve isn't an alcoholic left-winged atheist like Brian, he is cynical and witty. You could also argue that Seth himself is cynical and witty, which can be explained through the style of humor present on his shows. So Seth was representing himself as a dog in his creations long before Family Guy. As a child, MacFarlane developed an interest in illustration, and at the age of 2, he began drawing cartoon characters such as Fred Flintstone and Woody Woodpecker. By age 5, he knew he wanted to pursue a career in animation, and began creating flipbooks after his parents found a book on the subject for him. 4 years later, at the age of 9, he began publishing a weekly comic strip called Walter Crouton for the Kent Good Times Dispatch, the local newspaper. It paid him $5 per week. He went on to study film, video, and animation at the Rhode Island School of Design, where he earned a Bachelor of Fine Arts degree. As a student, he intended to work for Disney, but changed his mind after graduating. Well, Disney now owns Fox, so I guess he ended up working for Disney in the end. MacFarlane was recruited during the Senior Film Festival by development executive Ellen Cockrill and president Fred Seibert. He went on to work at Hanna-Barbera, then Hanna-Barbera Cartoons, based on the writing content of The Life of Larry, rather than his own drawing abilities. He was one of only a few people hired by the company solely based on his writing talent. MacFarlane worked on 3 television shows during his tenure at the studio: Dexter's Laboratory, Cow and Chicken, and Johnny Bravo, working as both a writer and a storyboard artist. MacFarlane spent the most time working on Johnny Bravo. He found it easier to develop his own style at Johnny Bravo through the show's process of script writing, which Dexter's Laboratory and Cow and Chicken did not use. As a part of the Johnny Bravo crew, he met actors and voiceover artists such as Adam West and Jack Sheldon of Schoolhouse Rock. These meetings later became significant to the production and success of Family Guy. After providing insight into MacFarlane's history thanks to Wikipedia, it would be interesting to see how different his fate would have been if Seth MacFarlane was born 20 years later. Just a reminder, none of what I say should be taken as factual and is just grasping at straws type of conspiracies that are being shown solely for the sake of entertainment value. Keep in mind that Seth was born in the year 1973, so he would be born in 1993 in this hypothetical time skip. When MacFarlane was hired by Hanna-Barbera, he was working on cartoons like Dexter's Laboratory, Cow and Chicken, and Johnny Bravo. All 3 of those shows premiered in 1996 and 1997, meaning that in the 20-year time skip, MacFarlane would have been working on Cartoon Network shows from 2016 to 2017. This means he could have been working on shows like Steven Universe, the Powerpuff Girls 2016 reboot, Mighty Magiswords, and OKKO. Keep in mind that children's cartoons back in the 90s had more of a nuance to them, especially when it comes to hidden adult jokes. Meaning that his style wouldn't have been able to shine since children's shows at that time had its subtle adult humor drastically toned down. Either that, or he would have worked on Adult Swim shows like Rick and Morty. Could you imagine Seth MacFarlane writing Pickle Rick? If Seth had gone into adult animation, his shows would have also had a much different fate. Since Family Guy premiered on Fox in 1999, his adult animated series would be set to premiere in 2019. If Seth had a show premiere in 2019, it would have either aired on Fox, where it would have gotten 2 to 3 seasons and 35 to 40 episodes, then get canned immediately after. If he chose to pitch it to Netflix, it would have most likely been gutted after 1 season, given Netflix's habits. In the 20-year time skip scenario, there's also a very good chance that Seth would have never gotten picked up by Warner Brothers, since the cartoons airing at the time didn't have much of a nuance to them as they did in the 90s, as he was hired for his writing rather than his art. So there's a very good chance that those standards could have changed in the time skip. Had Seth not been picked up by Warner Brothers, I could see him going down one of 2 different paths. He would have either been a PNG tuber or a webcomic artist with a character like Brian as his self-insert winning strawman against arguments he made up in his head, a la Andrew Dobson and Blobby and Friends. I could see Seth being a PNG tuber because he chose to self-insert himself as a dog, and a lot of PNG tubers like to make animal avatars of themselves. On top of that, MacFarlane is also very vocal about his political views and possibly other things, meaning he would fit right in with the video essay PNG tuber crowd. Can you picture MacFarlane being a PNG tuber with Brian Griffin as his avatar defending map rights? I feel like he would also be a webcomic artist in the 20-year time skip because, much like the video essay PNG tuber, MacFarlane is also very vocal about his political views and possibly other things. Meaning it would make sense if he became a webcomic artist that had his self-insert avatar, Brian Griffin, winning strawman arguments he made up in his head. In fact, just color Brian Griffin blue, give him glasses, a fedora, and many unnecessary eyebrows, and he's basically Dobson. You might be asking yourself, what does the 20-year time skip scenario have to do with MacFarlane being a furry? Well, to that, I answer this. Furries weren't really much of a thing during MacFarlane's time, and there's a possibility he might have been a furry if he were born 20 years later. The other possible scenarios I listed, like the PNG tubers and the webcomic artists, are just things that other furries or people with animal avatars tend to do. What I'm trying to say is, thank you, Seth, for being born in the time that you were in.